So, hello everyone, I am Kuhu Gupta. I am the General Director Early Career for the Data Visualization Society. Today, I welcome you all to our 6th Fireside Chat about typography for data visualization. This chat is hosted by Data Visualization Society. If you don't know about us, we are a non-profit volunteer-run organization. We aim to bring together professionals who are interested in data viz and support them to grow and develop skills. It is free to join, and you can, if you're not a member yet, you can find us on datavisualizationsociety.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have our YouTube channel also, where you can find our previous Fireside Chat recordings. We are hosting these chats to have conversations with experts in the community to discuss relevant topics while most of us are working from home. So today's Fire Chat is about typography for data visualization. And I want to thank Excella for providing us with Zoom so that we could reach out to a broader community and recording this Fire Chat for us. Shout out for Amanda, who hooked us with Excella, and Amy for organizing these amazing Fireside Chats. So everyone who are participating today, there's a chat box where you can post your comments. And there's a Q&A box where you can post your questions, which we can ask during the chat. Now I will ask Neil to take this from here. He's the moderator for today's chat.
All right, hi everybody. My name's Neil Richards. I'm the Knowledge Director at the Database Society, and it's my job to be a moderator here. As I was saying, if I wasn't moderating this, I would be attending this, trying to learn as much as I can from our three great guests here. So I'm quite excited to be a moderator here, and I'll just sort of be trying to lead the chat on the questions. So I'm going to ask you one at a time, guys, to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about how you got started and what your connection is to typography and database. So I'll start just because you're first on my screen with Kia.
Okay, I am a designer for events and conferences. I run a little shop called Tight Ship. I'm based in Ventura in California, between LA and Santa Barbara. And I've been doing design for about 16 years. Started off in agencies doing publication layout and some website design, maybe about 12, 13 years ago, before it was actually good. And once it got good, I dropped out of website design and did more page layout. And I was also the president of local AIGA chapter in Santa Barbara. And oh, how I got started in it.
Yes.
I was actually, I majored in English at UC Santa Barbara. And so I kind of came into design through the back door or the side door. I didn't really go to design school. I started out as a 27-year-old intern at a small agency, 6, 7 people here in Ventura. And then I worked at another agency in Santa Barbara for about 3 years after that, so that's about 12 years. And then started my own company with a fellow ex-AIGA president. And we were going great until events became not such a hot ticket anymore because of the quarantine. So I'm kind of a free atom right now.
All right, and Tiffany, how about you?
Hi, I'm Tiffany France. I am a freelancer. I am a designer and a developer. I teach at a local college as well. I'm in the art department, and I teach digital design and UX theory. I have been in this field for about 15 years as well. And I started in English as well. That was my first bachelor's. And then I went back to school for graphic design. And I just have always been, really, I loved theory and about type and typography. I just like letter forms. I like pictures of letter forms. I like a single letter form to put it on my wall and just look at it. I think letter forms are really lovely on their own, and I love how they come together. And I think it does appeal to a lot of English majors because we like to read a lot of the times. And of course, letters and type is at the center of of books and written material. So yeah.
All right, Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard. I work day-to-day with an organization called Uncharted Software. It's a commercial company that creates really interesting data visualizations, largely for subject matter experts, people who work with a lot of data on a day-to-day basis. And I've been doing visualization for over 25 years. And I think I became interested in typography about 8 years or so ago, when I was thinking more about, what can visualizations do than just using labels in the visualizations. There's obviously got to be more that's possible and feasible, and things beyond a tag cloud. And so I went back to do a PhD and completed a PhD. Particularly around text and visualization. And that's where I realized I needed to learn more about typography as well. So picked up some understanding about type and visualization and how they might come together.
All right, well, that's interesting, because it kind of leads me on to my next question, which is probably all about the chat, which is basically, what would you say is typography? Because to a layperson like me, I might think of typography equals fonts, but I might not necessarily sort of think of the issues behind that. So what would you say is typography?
I can
Type?
start.
Sure.
Sure, yes.
I think when we talk about typography, you're talking about letter forms. You're talking about a system of putting letter forms together, the spacing between the letters, the letting the lines, the space between each of the lines. It's the whole system of type is putting together bits of text to make them highly legible, highly readable. Yeah. Did you have more on that, Richard?
Absolutely. So that's a key part, is that you have to be able to put these letter forms together, and then you see and understand those bits of text. You understand the word cat and dog and so forth, the same way that you understand when you're creating a visualization, a bar or a circle, and understanding the size of the circle means something. You understand cat and dog and the text means something. And it's the combination of those things together that become a really interesting intersection when you start saying, I've got words that represent things, and I've got shapes that represent things.
I guess I would also go macro with that as far as page layout is concerned. If you have a whole block of text on a page, and you can't just subject somebody to that unless that's your goal, but you want it to be legible and readable and comprehensible, and you want people to be able to learn something from it as quickly as possible for communication. It's a venue for communication.
That's actually one of the things that makes me really excited about typography, right? Because that macro page layout is, I've got this wall of information, but I'm able to use type to change size, to change color, to change weight, to change italics, to direct your attention on that wall of text and really very quickly and easily navigate that with visual cues, right? So type has a language for navigating and understanding and moving through it using visual cues, which, wait a minute, that sounds a lot like what we do in visualization. We're using color and size and shape to help you navigate and understand information using visual cues. So.
Yeah, I like that. I like it because you can use color, but you can also use text in blocks and kind of step back from the text and see that it creates shades of gray. And in that way, you can create hierarchies. Your header might be a darker black, and your paragraph text might have just a rhythm or a color to it that is a gray, that you could kind of like, almost like if you like squint your eyes a little bit, you can see your page have this texture and this color that goes through.
Yeah. And you end up using white space for it, or blank space, the same way that you would with any other visual element, whether it's photography or icons or whatever. You see the shapes that type creates on the page itself, and that will help. At least it's helped me kind of edit the type better, or lay it out better, or this column is full of rivers and this one's not. So what can I do over here to kind of make it a little bit better.
And then when we take those same ideas of manipulating type, whether it's color or weight or italic, we can bring those in and think about those things in the visualization. How do I use those things on an axis, on a data point, on a map label, on a whatever? Type can do a lot more work for you.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've heard it said that you can, it's all very well sort of asking an expert what their favorite font is, but you go further, ask them what is their favorite shade of dark gray. And that can really open up a conversation about, you know, getting exactly that right balance. So I guess you're kind of answering some of my questions, because I was wanting to know sort of how did the right typography choices really help to communicate data?
I would say that it starts with, well, like anything else in design, it helps organize a visual hierarchy of what you want the viewer to see or comprehend first, second, third. You can set up your own sequence of understanding within a block of information, so it's just not this monolithic thing that someone can't parse.
And I think I thought I saw a question go by about somebody saying a dashboard. And the same way that type can organize information on a page and have blocks of text and headings and subheadings, you can imagine the same thing being able to organize dashboards, right? It's so easy to create visualizations now that we can have these dashboards or long scrolling pages with, you know, lots and lots of visualizations. And so then your type around that helps you organize that into logical groups and helps you point and steer things. In fact, I think there's a whole subset in visualization now where we can make these really rich data dense visualizations. That part of the challenge is communicating what is the insight in that visualization, right? And communicating that insight is a matter of annotations or blocks of text around it or things like that. And again, you're coming right back from this dense visual representation of data to descriptions using text, and that language of using text, using bold, using italics and so forth becomes really important to help shape that message and help organize where you should look when you've got a lot of different things going on.
Yeah, I love that. The predictability of systems like that, where if you have the dashboard, just, you know, reiterating what Richard says, if you have a dashboard with a lot of different graphs on it, letting your users get used to a pattern so that they know this is the title. Okay, now I can scan through all of this and I can see all the titles and I know what the titles will be. You can set your type up in that way so that there's always a reliable system and making it easier on the user, because everything in type, just like everything in design, is about making it really easy for your user to navigate whatever you've put on the page.
Okay.
And I would say even, you know, look at New York Times or any of the long articles that have been coming out about COVID, where you've got text visualization down a long scrolly page, right? There's a huge amount of work in the typography to help organize the different sections with headings and subheads and tick labels and annotations and cross references that really help you navigate that long story.
People don't see that though, do they? They just see the part of the graph that goes way up to the title page and off the edge. And
yeah,
but it helps it make it just more comprehensible, sure.
Right.
And if they don't see it, that means it was done well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good typography is invisible, right?
Sounds good. Well, we have a great, we've got some questions coming in actually, and the first question probably follows on nicely from that, from Dan. He says, how are the semantics of typography changing in our rapidly globalizing interconnected world? And specifically, how does this affect font choice in data visualization?
The easiest one for me is probably the simplest and most annoying one, is that people call them fonts instead of typography. But typographers lost that war a long time ago. People are just going to call them fonts, and that's what it is.
It is. It is what it is.
So just for people who may not know, a font is actually a drawer. So back when they used to do big letter pressing machines, they would have like fonts, which were drawers full of these little metal letterheads, these lead letterheads, or letter forms. And each drawer would be like, okay, here's Helvetica. That's probably a bad example because they probably didn't have that, but maybe here's Baskerville or something. And let's get the font drawer out and then use it. A typeface is kind of the more, I guess, correct version of what you're using when you use something like Helvetica. You're referring to a typeface.
Font is a collection of typefaces. And
exactly, yeah.
I'd also guess, this might, and it's just a guess too, that the semantics will be, or have already been, shifting towards the digital space instead of looking at things on a physical space. It's just from words like page. Page is, what does a page mean anymore? Or what does gutter width or margin? I mean, those are still applicable on a website, but absolutely not in the same way. So the words are probably meaning something different, or have been warped a little bit. But I mean, throw that one in the language evolves pile, because I'm happy to just let it do that.
I think, yeah, I'd like to jump into another part here on the semantics thing, which I think is really interesting, and that is that visualization people may not know is that your choice of font, every different font has meaning associated with that font. So most people probably know, don't use Comic Sans because Comic Sans implies that it's very casual, right? So if you're trying to do a serious presentation to your board about something that you've learned about your data, you probably don't want to label your visualization using Comic Sans. But that's true, every single type choice has a semantic association with it as well, right? So if you choose to use Times Roman, or you choose to use Helvetica, or you choose to use whatever, there are all these additional baggage that you're inheriting with the choice of font that you use. If
you choose Papyrus, you're going to be made fun of on Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
I wanted to note something about the Comic Sans usage too. Is that it kind of falls under my general attitude these days of I try not to be too snobby about fonts, because most fonts, except for Papyrus, but most fonts generally do have a use. I was at the AIGA design conference in Pasadena last spring, I think, and there was a presentation by someone named Liz Jackson from the disabled list. And Liz, the day before that, Liz had placed all these little stickers around the conference site with the AIGA logo, but in Comic Sans. And just for the sake of trolling a conference full of designers with Comic Sans. And then at her presentation the next day, she said, that was me. And I did that because you all are too snobby about this font. And I should have known better at that too. My wife is an 8th grade teacher, and she uses Comic Sans on her assignments for the kids because it's easier and faster to comprehend. And at this presentation, Liz Jackson had also said that that Comic Sans was easier for people who are dyslexic or who have other conditions that make it not as easy to read regular type as regular type, conventional type as the rest of us.
So use the font that reaches the audience.
Yes, and so I've tried to really kind of de-snobify my typography aesthetics since then, and very quickly, but I still haven't found a good use for Papyrus, so I'm going to still be a snob about that one.
On semantics, there is one thing that I notice. I'm in the web world a lot, and if I'm going to InDesign to do something in print, you're going to see a term like leading, but in CSS that would be line height. If you're in InDesign, you would see kerning or tracking, but if you're in CSS, you would say letter spacing. So there is a change in terms from traditional print media to what we're using on the web. And I think that a lot of times I don't know whether the people who created CSS, whether they knew or not that those weren't the right words, or they didn't care. They just wanted you to understand it. They wanted to say, this is a letter space. We don't use lead anymore. The word leading comes from a piece of lead that they would put in the plates to print newspapers. to space out lines. We don't use lead anymore. We use, you know, the height of between two lines. So there is kind of a progression on making words make sense in web that maybe we would have never let go of those words if the web hadn't been invented, you know. So it's a good thing.
I mean, we've got a lot of sort of related questions, if you like, around fonts or possibly typefaces. Is there a sort of acknowledged list sort of amongst sort of experts or professionals like yourself as to which fonts represent which kind of things, or which fonts have what particular associations or sort of baggage with them? There's a specific question about which font would you use to show trust, for example. And I suspect I might get a different answer from the three of you, but are they all going to be sort of within certain different families of fonts?
I would say yes, there are ways of looking at that. There are associations, and if I'm looking for an association, I just typically Google a font and read this story about the font to figure out what there might be some kind of consensus around that association if I'm second guessing it. But I think there's a second level to that of like, are there just things that you try to avoid, or certain rules of things that you try not to go to? And, you know, so the Comic Sans is a good bait question to try and troll people with, because it does have actually good uses in some cases. But I'll give another example of something that is not, something not to do, something to avoid. And that is the case in visualization. Sometimes we're working with things that are codes. They're a mixture of alphanumeric characters, right? So if I'm dealing with things that are stocks, there's a combination of text characters and numerical values, or schedules for trains, or all kinds of things. And when you start mixing those things, a number of different typefaces weren't designed really to be used that way. So you might find that the 0 and the O look exactly the same, and the number 1 and the lowercase l and the uppercase I all look the same. So if you're now giving a user interface where you can't decipher what you're looking at because you've chosen a font where you're mixing these different characters together that weren't really designed that way, then you could get yourself into a problem, right? And so there's versions of like Helvetica and Gil where, you know, you get a code and you don't know what it is.
Okay. So I might actually move the conversation a little bit, because I think we wanted to talk about titles and labels as well, and I've probably fallen into the trap of with my first question, associating typography with fonts, because it's kind of what we like to talk about. But how important would you say the title and your labels are to any visualization?
Extremely.
It's kind of a leading question.
Like really important? Yeah.
No, not really.
Well, I mean,
I just thought if you had some thoughts on that, yeah.
Yeah, I've actually, yeah. You can go ahead, Kier.
Oh well, with titles, it's that I think about the headline. Headline not written by the journalist, but inserted later by the editor, where it's not only is it a more explosive, baity, clicky thing, but it's also something that in whatever typeface choice the publication chooses to put it in, it will convey urgency and immediacy no matter what. So there's all kinds of hot potatoes associated with headlines specifically. And I would assume titles and subheads would work the same way. But that's much more of a general thing. Tiffany, if you were going to get into specifics about it, go for it.
No, I like that. Yeah, because if you think about the way people will use, I'm thinking newspaper comes to mind, but even just clicking on an article like Medium, or seeing if you're going to like the article, of course, the title has to be really clear and easy to read, because people want to scan that in seconds. look at it, see what this is about. Maybe even you have like a very clearly defined subheader where they can find out more information if they're not sure if this article is good for them. So as far as titles go, yeah, they should be really, really clean, not too heavy. Like, of course, a lot of titles are bolded weight, but in general, if they're too bolded or they're too difficult to read, it slows down that process of being able to digest the information quickly.
And you won't be able to have a longer title either. You're kind of constrained with, you know, the pithiest, most lowest common denominator way of communicating. But on the other hand, we want to make it easy to understand. So that's where English majors get headaches.
I'm just going to come in with a slightly more meta answer that to say that when we make a visualization, we're starting with data and we're encoding that data in some way. We're often transforming it into colors and shapes and whatever and making a plot. And then you have to remember, that's not the end game. The end game is you want somebody to understand what you've created. You've got to decode that again. So now the person receiving it needs to understand what's going on. And the type becomes super critical at that point, because that's the type on your title, your subhead, that's the type on your axes labels and your tick labels. And all of those bits of type are the things that are letting you make sense of that visualization that you've created, right? So you need to think about, are they legible? Are they readable? Are you capturing the right amount of information in there, not making things too long or too short to be able to convey that? And you know, what is too long and what is too short, I think also depends on the domain, because you know, the amount of text you might use in print on a news website might be very short, but I've worked in some financial applications where it's like text everywhere, white space, 0.
And you could also be constrained by SEO, where like that title has too many words, or those aren't the right words for it, or it's not going to show up. The full title won't actually show up on the Google search page. But it's a better description of what's actually in the piece. So it's this I found it to be a constant, not stressful, but constant balancing act. It's not always fun.
And following on from that, are the considerations the same or similar for if you're designing for mobile? Or is it, or do you have a whole different set of constraints you need to design for?
I'll take that one if y'all don't mind. In my experience with mobile, I came into web design just as the mobile first thing was happening, where it wasn't an argument anymore. You have to design for mobile first, and so that forced us to be really, really economical with what we chose. Maybe not even 2 fonts, maybe just different weights of the same font, and maybe not anything that would elevate legibility or comprehensibility quicker, higher contrast, fewer words and more pictures, which made me crazy. There was a great book, that one called Don't Make Me Think, but then that title also makes me crazy because I think all the time and I love to. I want to spend time with something. But then it was really smart. So that was my experience with mobile first, and I should emphasize that I didn't last long doing that, and that wasn't just because I couldn't hack JavaScript. It was because it did feel constraining in a lot of ways but then that might have been my bias coming from print page layout. I couldn't hack it fast enough, which as long as there were brilliant kids who could do it better than I could, that's fine. They could take care of it.
I like the idea of using one font. I think a lot of times people will come in with a lot of different typefaces, and they'll be like, here's one for the header, here's one for the, you know, the body copy, here's one for the, but the idea of just using one really well created font, maybe I happen to like a lot of the Google fonts, such as Work Sans or Roboto or Open Sans. Well, Open Sans I'm kind of angry about, but you know, those type of just clean fonts. Using one in different weights. So of course there's the lightweight too to consider. One of the trends that I see that I really like is using the thin, lightest weight for headers. I think it looks really cool and big when you use thin, lightweight on big letters for titles. But as far as mobile, I do agree. The less fonts that you have to load, the faster the experience is for the user. What I hate more than anything is, I think it's called flouter, this flash of unstyled content that appears when you're using a Google font. And if you're on a mobile device, sometimes your connection is slow. So you see Times New Roman for a second, and then it switches to the Roboto font or whatever once it loads the font. The less that you have to do that to your users, the better. So the fewer the fonts, I think, the better. And if you can include them, you know, if you want to include them directly on your site rather than in your CSS, rather than including them as a link, you know, sometimes that makes it faster using the add font face. But yeah, thinking about fonts in terms of not overloading the bandwidth when you load them onto mobile is important.
I think from a design perspective, one of the fun things with mobile is you do have to be more economical with how many fonts you're putting in. You do have to be more economical with, you know, how many words you're putting in. But one of the opportunities is that the pixel resolution on mobile is so awesome. It's so dense that you can go down to like some really small font sizes for some of the labeling. Like if you're doing a tree map or something like that, you can actually put in quite small fonts. And so long as you're sticking to a really clean, crisp font, you can actually get them going down fairly small.
I think data viz on mobile is maybe the hardest thing. It's just so hard to do data viz on mobile. I mean, not get the fonts are one thing, but just getting designs, data viz designs to work on a mobile platform has been one of the biggest challenges of my career for sure.
I have a lot of fun with something like Google Maps, where you think about what they choose to exclude at what stage. Like if you zoom all the way out to a map of North America, you'll see the country names and the continent name. And then if you go in more, you'll see the state names or province names and then the city names. It's that sort of idea that plays out on the web a little bit, where you reward people for going in deeper. But with something like say with Google Maps, where they have their straight, you know, I think it's just maybe one or two fonts, if that. They're also really judicious about what information they reveal at what time. That's not necessarily something you can do with like a blog post all the time. But and with I mean, I'm a huge map nerd, but Google Maps is kind of beyond my capability as far as of understanding the development part of it. But in my experience of just as a user, the way that they parse out information, or they hand it to you in little pieces as you go, seems to be the most economical way of dealing with just a massive dump of stuff. And the typography is one of the only ways that they can do that effectively. I mean, they have iconography and visuals and color and all that, but for labels, and that's what they work with the best.
I think the maps are a good use of the system too. We talked about systems earlier. Just the systems that Google has put together for the Google Maps. If you have time, you have a minute, just go on, look up your area and just kind of zoom in and count the number of different sizes and weights and how they're using type really masterfully to show the size of a city or the importance of a landmark. Yeah, it's a very good use of type for sure.
Yeah, definitely cartography has a very long history of using type to convey data quite richly. And, you know, if we go back to paper, whether looking at something you might create with Esri, yes, I can manipulate size and weight and choose different font type. You know, ordnance survey maps use like black letter fonts to indicate historic ruins. They use a serif font to indicate Roman era ruins. They vary italics and they vary weights to indicate information about those names. And it's all done in a fairly discrete way, so you can look at the map and not even have to worry about what all those different things mean. Or if you want to, you can actually read the legend and understand, oh, that's what this, piece of text additionally means, the formatting additionally means. So it is really super cool what cartographers do with type.
All right. So I have a question now about accessibility in particular. One question, the person says they're doing a lot of work for CDC, and there's a huge push for 508 compliance, which I've just had a quick Google of. So obviously they're talking about accessibility. So how do you think typography and design can sort of help this cause in terms of UI and data visualization, so in terms of accessibility compliance?
I'm not familiar with the accessibility compliance rules. I would think one of the paramount aspects of typography would be legibility. Can I actually read the thing that I have? So, not, super lightweight, thin type is a great title, but don't use it at a little tiny size, because those little thin lines might actually be drop out on you, or they just become very hard to see. They blend in with the background. So legibility becomes a critical issue to make sure that you've got enough contrast between the type and the background, and the sizes are appropriate for your audience. I think that would be number one.
I'd also imagine it would have something to do with screen reading for visually impaired people. The thing that was always, I had to just knock it into my head every time, and this is probably why I'm not a web designer that much anymore, is that the ADA requirements mandate that there are all these other things that you need to do. Not just, you don't just put an image on your website. It has to have alt tags, it has to have a description, it has to have things that will make it accessible and comprehensible for people who are visually impaired. And so that, I think, is a large aspect of the ADA requirement, as I understand it. But there's probably been much more since then. It was driven home to me at a, I think it was a Web Design World Conference or something like that. And we had somebody from the WCAG organization, I think that's what it was. And this was a while ago now, but this person, she had MS, I believe. And so when she came to make her presentation, she made a point of starting at the back of the auditorium and walking with her cane all the way up to the stage. And she said, how are you making your website easy for someone like me to use? And later she put it another way of, would you still like to be using the web when you're 85? How will it be different for you? How will your, what your health, your other impairments due to age, how will those affect how you use the web? You need to think about that person when you're creating a site. And those kind of accessibility things, it's my understanding is what the ADA is about. That's kind of a long roundabout way to say that, but that's what I mostly did when I was doing web design for accessibility.
Some of the 508 traps that I see a lot in things that I've created are color. I'll use gray for my text, like, I'll want to say this is muted text. So I'll go in with like a CCC, like a really light gray, and that, I don't know whether that falls under 508 or not, or whether that can even be tested for it. Probably can. But that's something that is hard to read even for people in their 20s, So thinking about that font size, we deal with that a lot with data visualization, and I'm very guilty of this because I do this all the time, of wanting to fit a lot of text in. So I make it down to like 8-point font, and then you can't read it. So I think when we're thinking about accessibility, we have to think about those two things for sure. Like what color is your font? What color background are you putting your font on? Is it blue font on a red background? And of course, yeah, and then the size of it. And there's something, this is to the left of this conversation a little bit, but I did just find this font recently. typeface, sorry, Kier. This typeface, which is called Noto Sans. I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but Noto Sans is a collaboration of a lot of type designers, and it is a font which is meant to have the same look, feel, weight in multiple languages. They have hundreds of languages, so that you can use Noto Sans Japan, Noto Sans Korean, Noto Sans Russian, and whatever version of Noto Sans you look, it will have that same kind of, it'll fit the same kind of aesthetic, if you will, of that typeface, which I think is really neat. Not necessarily exactly hitting the mark on accessibility, but definitely something that's to think about if you're serving a worldwide audience, an international audience.
Just one note for people when we talk about things like legibility and the CCC on the white background being hard to read. A key aspect of legibility is the contrast between the text and the background. And so when you talk about doing red on blue or blue on red, if you were to convert that into a grayscale image, the reason why it's hard to read is that the blue and red are almost exactly the same brightness, right? And so that's why they're very difficult to read. So what you're looking for is a strong contrast in helping legibility. So that's one of the elements of improving legibility, is maintaining a good contrast, right? So.
Okay. So I guess this also leads on slightly. A question about there are some well-known rules, if you like, of typography of text on a page. So that, like, not having too many fonts or no more than 2 fonts, be intentional about missing serif and sans serif, etc. It's interesting to me because as someone who's in more traditional data visualization, I can sort of make these equivalences, if you like. So if typographer wanted to troll somebody with Comic Sans, it would be like me leading with a 3D pie chart in a presentation or something like that, which you can kind of explain away an occasional use for sometimes. So my question is, are there rules, rules in inverted commas that you think are okay to break, or you sort of disagree with? So rules that sort of generally accepted within the typography community that you actually think sometimes it's better to break than others.
Go ahead.
There's a huge rolling debate about, is serif better for reading or is sans serif better for reading? Look, you know what? Some people think sans serif, who cares? Like, you'll find for every one article you find that says serif is easy for reading, you'll find another that says, no, it's not, doesn't matter. I think that's a rule that what you have to do is just understand how type works. Like, if it's all these things we're talking about, if it's too small to read, or it's hard to read, or it's like Comic Sans really small, kind of breaks up the letter form, and it's difficult to read when it's really small. If you're having trouble reading it, don't use it. But that would be a rule that there aren't any rules really. Like, there's rules that get you in the door, but once you're in the door, then you understand the basics, then it's open for you to break those rules. Yeah.
Yeah, the central premise for me in design was always who are you going to exclude? Because you will exclude someone whether or not you try to do that, whether it's from your own personal biases or lived biases or aesthetic biases. Somebody will be excluded, and at some point you just are going to have to accept that and say, okay, well, I'm going to ship this as it is, and when I get called on it, I will make those changes. I don't know, that is super risky and maybe not at all ethical. But the idea that there will be exclusions. I've kind of come to accept that. And then for me, the ultimate endpoint of that is for it becoming some sort of David Carson-like art project where you have a bunch of glyphs or characters on the page and nobody can read it. And that's probably the most deliberate type troll in history was Carson, at least in my experience. But if it serves the work, if it serves legibility and communication, break a rule, bend a rule, but learn it before you do it. it's a pain in the butt to learn rules, but it makes it easier and more fun to bend and break. So, and then you can justify it.
Right. So I was just going to say, definitely I break rules, and that was part of the reason why I did the thesis, was A, to learn the rules, and B, to then figure out where it might be useful to break them. And so certainly if you're doing something like a title or a subhead or a tick mark, follow the rules. If you don't need to break them, follow the rules. But on the flip side, you might want to, people will say only use, two versions of type, or people will say, don't change more than one parameter on the type, like don't go bold and italic and underline, like keep yourself in control. And on the flip side, in some of the work that you see in visualizations, right, like a pie chart or a bar chart is just a single variable at a time. But then you get bar charts where you've got color is conveying a variable and the bar is conveying a variable. And then you get things like Hans Rosling where you've got, the position, the color, the size, the motion, lots of things are going on, right? So there's a lot of different things conveying different information. And you can use this type the same way, like the maps did, but you can use those in a visualization. So I could make a scatter plot where I've got text, get rid of the bubbles, and the text varies in size, varies in color, varies in weight, varies in italics, and the weight and the italics and the color, these are all conveying different variables. Now, will that be easy to decode? No, not at all. It's a visualization about conveying a lot of different rich data all at once. And so there are cases where you might want to do that. And then it becomes very useful to break those rules and mix all these different typographic things together. You'll have to try it out and see if it works. It's not going to work in all cases. It's going to be experimental.
Okay, yes, so many parallels with traditional data visualization there. And as you're saying that, I'm sort of sheepishly realizing that there's a whole sort of multicolored bubble thing that I've designed behind me there, so I can't really, I can't really speak. So I want to leave a couple of questions I've got. We've got some great questions been coming in, and I apologize I haven't been able to put them all to our panel. So I've tried to sort of combine some of them. I'm going to ask one more, which is, what do you think about legends versus inline labels? So it's kind of a question about positioning. How does that play into typography with regards to immediacy of comprehension versus clutter?
I'm an anti-label person or anti-legend person. I don't really like legends. And I think it's about 6 years ago, I worked at a GAFA company, and my supervisor was the one who told me, a legend, you can't use legends. Legends are horrible. And he kind of taught me a new way of building your visualization using inline labels and other techniques to avoid legends. So I'm kind of I'm a convert into that. I think if you need a legend, that means maybe you didn't build the visualization right. But then again, these rules are meant to be broken. So I can see at times when people do need legends. Just for me and my practice, I work very hard not to have legends at all. And I prefer labels in the text. Like if you have a company text, like in your subheader, you can even, kind of indicate with color what the different variables in your visualization are. Just using proper labeling, doing different things to try to avoid legends. Yeah.
I'm all in at putting the labels directly into the visualization if you have the space to fit them in there and it doesn't detract from the primary patterns that you're trying to convey. So a lot of the automated software, if you're looking at something like Excel, it's going to automatically make a legend off to the side. But in a lot of cases, you can put those directly in. And there's research going back. I'm writing a book on text and visualization coming out later this year. But in there, I've got research from the 60s where people had already looked at this and said, yeah, we made a separate legend and we made a different one where we put the labels right in the chart. And guess what? The one where the labels in the chart were faster and easier to decode than the one with the separate legend. So it's been something that we've known for a very long time that if you can, and it doesn't detract from the primary reading of the visualization, then yeah, try and put them into the visualization.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Tiffany and Richard, that for me the primary example is Google Maps again, and I'm a map nerd. I love old style, you know, Portolan charts with these fancy ass legends and compass roses and all that stuff. But Google Maps doesn't really have a legend. The only thing that I guess could be used as a legend is the little scale bar to show you, you know, 1 inch to 5 miles or whatever it is. Everything else is within the map itself, within the labels and the iconography, and they are created and designed in such a way that they will be as intuitive as possible. So yeah, in line.
All right, some agreements across the board there. I do agree as well. So I've just got a couple more questions to ask. One which is, what's the most sort of common mistake that you tend to find that people use? So people like me who don't know enough about typography, what's the most sort of common or annoying mistake that you see people use? Just so we can take one thing away from this.
I think it's going to be a matter of font choice. It's that same thing of you know, once you learn Photoshop, you're going to go through your ugly Photoshop filter phase, where you plow through each one, or you have a guitar effect pedal, like, yeah, I'm going to put reverb on everything. Where sooner or later you learn to use it judiciously. So for me, that's not even a mistake. It's just kind of like seeing what the thing can do. And then once you just kind of overdo it, you start to, you know, to use it less or use it at the more appropriate spot. I try to not be so judgy about those things anymore. There's a real tendency to do that when you're trying to make your bones as a creative person, to really punch up and say, well, this person did that wrong, and that agency, you know, really screwed up with this other thing. And it's like, okay, well, great, but why? And, you know, explain why, and don't just use it as a reason to go dinosaur hunting. It's really important to be patient with and accepting of the way that people create things, because we don't want to be gatekeepers. We don't want to pull the ladder up behind emerging, you know, data viz professionals or designers or typographers or whomever. So I really try not to get too judgmental about stuff like that. I
totally agree with that. Yeah, I have some of the students that I have, they love DaFont. And they go to DaFont like crazy, and they submit these assignments with like, oh, look, I found like the Coca-Cola logo font. Here's the title of my page. And, you know, a lot of the comments I get is that it's just, you know, all these other fonts are so boring. They all look the same. You know, Coca-Cola is at least interesting. It adds some visual appeal. And yeah, I do see these students come in at that age, but then, you know, if you follow them in 5-10 years, they realize that I think there was a question about trust earlier. How do you get trust in your font? If you want your users to come and look at what you've created and feel a sense of trust or authority or, you know, professionalism, you won't use a Coca-Cola font, right? You won't use anything from DaFont probably, but DaFont is really a fun place to go and look at, you know, creations that other people have made and use them, you know, on the side for fun, for whatever you want, but maybe not on a professional website.
Yeah, I think it's like any kind of visualization. You need to do a look and make sure what you're doing works at a reading at a most basic elementary level. Does it answer the types of questions you're trying to ask of this chart or visualization or graph or whatever it is that you're making? And so the same way that you might be critical about what are the colors that I'm using, you can look at it and be critical about the text. Can I distinguish between zeros and ones and L's and I's if you're working with codes? Can I read it against the background? Can I look at it on mobile, and does it work on, you know, not the newest device, but, you know, the device that maybe some of you people who haven't upgraded will be looking at it on? you know, going through those kinds of things, because we see those problems with all kinds of visualizations. It's not just type, right? Like I was looking last night at a visualization on Wikipedia on a web page that somebody had stuck on a line chart with about 30 lines on it, and they're using color to differentiate between the lines, and they've a legend on it, but it's useless, right? Like I can't distinguish between the 8 different shades of blue that you made and have on your lines. So why? You know, same thing with your fonts, right? Like you used a really great serif font that doesn't work at a small size for the device that you intend. Then don't use that one. Pick a different one.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Just perhaps in the last 3 minutes, just one last question, which is, could you recommend one resource, whether, I don't know, maybe that's a book or a website or something that would that you would recommend for us to learn more about typography, or one source of inspiration?
I'll happily jump in this, because right when I was starting my thesis, I got Ellen Lupton's book on, I think it's called Thinking with Type. Yeah, and that book was just really easily accessible to somebody who didn't know a lot about type, and opened up a lot of things that I didn't know about type. It was fantastic. And there's hundreds of more resources, but that's a good place to start.
I love this Jessica
Fantastic.
Hish article. There's a Jessica Hish article which is called "Upping Your Type Game," and I'll link it in the chat. Upping Your Type Game is so good about talking about not just like the free fonts we use all the time, but about like Hoffler and some of the type foundries and what makes a really good quality font. And that's the thing that that maybe we didn't touch on too much, but there is a difference between just a regular old font and a good quality font that has all the glyphs and really stable letter characters. But yeah, that's a good one. Check it out. And also read that book he recommended, because that's a great book.
My only suggestion in the time left would be Type Ed, which was a course taught by the late, great Michael Stinson from Los Angeles. Michael died in November, but his courses, I believe, are still online at Type, I think I put it in the chat, type-ed.com. In particular, font pairing. It's with the main goal of encouraging people to read, make it faster and easier. So yeah, Type Ed.
Well, that's great, thank you. I could keep talking with this, and I've been writing and taking notes as well, like as if I was a panelist. So I've enjoyed the discussion, but I guess we should bring it to a close. Just to remind everyone that this session was recorded, so if you didn't get a chance to see it all, if you want to go back and catch a bit more, then it'll be on our YouTube channel, which you can link to from our website. So do go there in a couple of days and you should find it up there. But I just want to say thank you again. Thank you to Keir, to Richard, and to Tiffany. And we're getting some great feedback. A lot of people really enjoyed this talk. So thank you all very much. And hope to see you all in the next Fireside Chat.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.